Lieutenant Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the monitor screen. The deep space station around Neptune was quiet, just like it had been for the past 3 years. Nothing ever happened out here except for the occasional asteroid or comet. Jake had been watching empty space for so long that he almost missed the first signal. The numbers on his screen suddenly went crazy. Energy readings shot up higher than anything he had ever seen. Jake blinked and looked again. The readings were still there, still climbing. Something big was coming toward Earth, and it was moving fast. Jake hit the emergency button and called his commander. "Sir, we have a problem. Something huge is coming through the outer system. The energy readings are off the charts." Commander Pete Williams rushed to Jake's station. He looked at the screen and felt his blood turn cold. The readings showed not just one ship, but thousands of them. They stretched across space like a dark cloud, blocking out the stars behind them. "Get me a visual," Pete ordered. Jake worked his controls and put the image on the main screen. What they saw made both men step back in horror. The ships were not made of metal like human ships. They looked alive, like giant black creatures floating through space. Their surfaces moved and pulsed with red energy that looked like blood flowing through veins. "Send this to Earth Command right now," Pete said. "Tell them we have first contact and it doesn't look friendly." Admiral Lisa Carter was eating breakfast when the message reached Earth Command. She had been in the military for 30 years and had seen many crises, but nothing had prepared her for this. The images from the Neptune station showed a fleet so large it could cover entire planets. Lisa called an emergency meeting with all the top military leaders. In the war room, they watched the footage over and over. The alien ships were getting closer to Earth every hour. At their current speed, they would reach Earth in less than a week. "What do we know about them?" asked General Roy Barnes. "Nothing good," Lisa replied. "We tried to send radio signals, but they didn't answer. Then they sent us something back." Lisa played the alien message on the big screen. The images that appeared made several officers leave the room. The aliens showed them pictures of other worlds they had conquered. Dead cities stretched for miles. Mountains of bones reached toward empty skies. But the worst part was what they had done to the people. The aliens had kept some of the people alive, but they had changed them into something horrible. They hung from the alien ships like decorations, their bodies twisted into shapes that hurt. To look at, their eyes were still alive, still aware, still screaming silently for help that would never come. "They call themselves the Nethark," Lisa explained. "From what we can understand, they don't just kill people. They feed on pain and suffering. They keep their victims alive for years, maybe decades, just to harvest their agony." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. These aliens were not here to trade or talk. They were here to turn humanity into food. Captain Ben Rodriguez volunteered to lead the first contact team. He was brave, but he was also practical. Maybe there was still a chance to talk to these creatures, to find some way to avoid war. Ben took his ship, the UES Defiant, out to meet the alien fleet. As they got closer, the aliens allowed them to dock with their main ship. Ben and his team put on their best uniforms and tried to look diplomatic. They had no idea what they were walking into. The alien ship was like nothing humans had ever seen. The walls were not made of metal, but of something that looked like flesh. They pulsed with the same red energy they had seen from outside. The air smelled of decay and something else, something that made the humans feel sick. The aliens led them through long corridors. Along the walls, Ben saw things that made him wish he had never volunteered for this mission. Creatures from dozens of different worlds were embedded in the walls, their bodies fused with the ship itself. They were still alive, still conscious, and they followed the humans with their eyes, begging silently for death. The Nethark who met them looked almost human at first glance. But when it moved closer, Ben saw that its skin was too pale, its eyes too dark, and its smile showed too many teeth. When it spoke, its voice sounded like breaking glass. "We are pleased to meet the humans," it said. "You will make excellent additions to our collection. Your species shows great promise for prolonged suffering. Ben tried to stay calm. We come in peace. Maybe we can find a way to coexist without conflict. The Nethark laughed, and the sound made Ben's skin crawl. Peace? You misunderstand. We do not want your peace. We want your pain. We have studied your species for months. You feel pain so beautifully, so completely. We will keep you alive for centuries, feeling every moment of agony we can create. The alien gestured to the walls around them. These beings have been with us for thousands of years. They have learned to appreciate the art of suffering. Soon, your entire species will join them. Ben looked at the creatures in the walls again. One of them, something that might have once been like a human, mouthed the words "kill me" over and over. Ben realized with horror that this thing had been conscious and in pain for thousands of years. You're monsters, Ben said. No, the Nethark replied. We are artists. Pain is our medium. Suffering is our canvas. And soon, humanity will be our greatest masterpiece. Ben and his team were allowed to return to their ship, but only so they could tell Earth what was coming. The Nethark wanted humanity to know what awaited them. Fear and despair were just appetizers for the feast to come. The invasion began 3 days later. Earth's space defenses were the best humanity had ever built. Laser cannons, missile platforms, and shield generators protected the planet. But against the Nethark fleet, they might as well have been throwing rocks. The alien ships didn't use weapons like humans understood them. Instead, they used devices that reached into people's minds and amplified every form of pain they had ever felt. Soldiers on the defense platforms began screaming and couldn't stop. Some went insane from the agony. Others begged their friends to kill them. The first city to fall was Tokyo. The Nethark ships hung over the city like dark clouds. They didn't bomb buildings or shoot lasers. Instead, they used machines that made every person in the city feel like they were being burned alive, drowned and crushed all at the same time. The lucky ones died quickly from shock. The unlucky ones were taken by the aliens, lifted into the ships by beams of red light. From the ships, humanity could hear the screams of the people who had been taken. The screams went on for hours, then days, then weeks. New York fell next, then London, then Moscow. Each city that fell became a source of constant screaming that could be heard for miles. The Nethark were not just conquering Earth, they were turning it into one giant torture chamber. Admiral Lisa Carter sat in her command bunker, watching the reports come in. Half of Earth's major cities were already gone. The rest would fall within days. Humanity's weapons were useless against creatures that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of causing pain. But Lisa had one last card to play, deep in the mountains. There was a project so secret that most of the government didn't know it existed. It was humanity's last hope, and its most dangerous secret. As the screams of the dying echoed across the planet, Lisa picked up a red phone and made a call that would change everything. This is Admiral Carter, she said. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Wake up the Erogus project. It's time to open the box. The person on the other end was quiet for a long moment. Then they said, Admiral, you know what that means. If we do this, we might save humanity, but we'll lose what makes us human. Lisa looked at the screens showing the burning cities and listened to the endless screaming. Maybe that's a price we have to pay. The line went dead. Deep in the mountains, machines that had been sleeping for 20 years began to wake up. Humanity was about to discover that sometimes, to defeat monsters, you had to become something worse. The elevator went down for what felt like forever. Director Helen Walsh stood in the corner, watching the numbers on the screen count down. Level 50, level 100, level 150. The Erogus project was buried so deep in the Rocky Mountains that most people would never believe it existed. Helen had been in charge of this project for 15 years. In all that time, she had hoped she would never have to activate it. But with the screams of dying cities echoing across the planet, she knew there was no choice left. The elevator finally stopped at level 200. The doors opened to reveal a massive underground facility that stretched as far as the eye could see. Scientists in white coats hurried back and forth, preparing equipment that had been waiting in storage for decades. Dr. Kevin Turner was already waiting for her. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. For 20 years, he had been studying the artifacts that would either save humanity or destroy it completely. The artifacts are responding to the alien presence, Kevin said as they walked through the facility. It's like they know the Nethark are here. The energy levels have increased by 300% in the last hour. Helen looked through the thick glass windows into the main chamber. Inside, floating in the center of the room, was something that should not exist. It was a structure made of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols covered its surface, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Tell me again what we found, Helen said. Kevin pulled up a holographic display that showed the outer edges of the solar system. 23 years ago, our deep space probes found this drifting in the Kuiper Belt. It was just floating there, waiting. When we brought it back to Earth, we discovered it wasn't from our galaxy. It wasn't even from our universe. The display showed images of the artifact when it was first discovered. It looked dead then, just a piece of strange metal. But as soon as it was brought to Earth, it had begun to change. The beings who made this were called the Vorthek, Kevin continued. They existed millions of years ago. From what we can translate of their records, they faced something even worse than the Nethark. Something that made the Nethark look like children playing with toys. Helen shuddered. She had seen the footage from the invaded cities. If there was something worse than the Nethark, she didn't want to imagine what it was like. The Vorthek were losing their war, Kevin said. They were going to be completely destroyed, so they created this. He pointed to the artifact. They called it the Last Protocol. It was their final weapon, their last hope. What does it do? Helen asked. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. It changes people. It gives them power, but at a terrible cost. The Vorthek writings are very clear about this. They say that those who use the Last Protocol gain the ability to fight any enemy, no matter how powerful. But they also say that the price is so high that death would be better. Helen looked at the artifact again. The symbols on its surface seemed to be moving, shifting into new patterns that made her feel sick. What kind of price? The transformed beings become something that even their enemies fear, Kevin said. The Vorthek records say they won their war, but afterward they wished they had lost. The transformed warriors turned on their own people. They became hungry for something that the Vorthek couldn't give them. Hungry for what? Pain, suffering. The power comes from the ability to inflict agony beyond anything natural. The transformed beings become addicted to causing pain. They start with their enemies, but it never stops there. Helen felt her stomach turn. So we're talking about turning our people into monsters. Yes, Kevin said simply, but monsters that can fight the Nethark and win. They walked deeper into the facility, past rooms full of equipment that Helen didn't want to understand. Scientists worked frantically to prepare the transformation chambers. These were metal pods that looked like coffins connected to the artifact by cables that pulsed with dark energy. Dr. Susan Blake approached them. She was Kevin's assistant, a brilliant scientist who had spent years studying the psychological effects of the transformation. The volunteers are ready, she said. We have 12 people willing to undergo the process. 12? Helen asked. That's not enough to fight an entire alien fleet. If the process works, it will be enough, Susan replied. The Vorthek record suggests that even one transformed being can take on thousands of normal enemies. The power they gain is exponential. Helen met with the volunteers in a small room near the transformation chambers. They were all military personnel, men and women who had already lost friends and family to the Nethark. Colonel Amy Peterson was their leader, a tough woman who had served in 3 wars. You all understand what this means, Helen said. If this works, you'll have the power to fight the aliens. But you'll also become something that humanity might need to fear. Amy stepped forward. Ma'am, I've seen what the Nethark do to people. I've heard the screams from the cities. If becoming a monster is what it takes to stop them, then that's what we'll do. The other volunteers nodded in agreement. Helen saw the determination in their eyes, but also something else. They were scared, not just of the transformation, but of what they might become afterward. The first transformation began an hour later. Amy was the first to enter the chamber. The metal pod closed around her, and the cables began to glow with energy from the artifact. The process was supposed to take 6 hours. Kevin monitored the readings from the control room. Her brain activity is off the charts, he reported. Something is definitely happening. On the screens, they could see Amy's vital signs changing. Her heart rate increased, then decreased, then increased again. Her brain waves showed patterns that Kevin had never seen before. Most disturbing of all, her body temperature was rising to levels that should have killed her. The artifact is teaching her, Kevin said. It's showing her how to access power that exists between dimensions. The Vorthak called it the hunger space, a place where pain and suffering have physical form. Helen watched the readings with growing concern. Is she still human? Physically, yes. But mentally, she's becoming something else. Something that understands pain in ways that normal humans can't. The transformation was completed at dawn. The chamber opened and Amy stepped out. She looked the same, but there was something different about her eyes. They were darker now, and when she looked at people, they felt like she was seeing right through them. How do you feel? Helen asked. Amy smiled, and the expression made everyone in the room uncomfortable. I feel hungry, she said. Not for food, for something else. Something I never knew I wanted before. The first test came sooner than expected. A Nethark scouting ship had been detected approaching the facility. Earth's remaining defenses were preparing to intercept it, but Helen decided to try something different. Can you handle one ship? She asked Amy. Amy's smile grew wider. I can handle much more than that. Amy was taken to the surface in a special transport. The Nethark ship was visible in the sky, a dark shape against the morning clouds. It was scanning the area, probably looking for human survivors to capture. Amy walked out into the open field and raised her hand toward the ship. What happened next would be talked about for years. Though most people would never believe it, energy flowed from Amy's body, but it wasn't like any energy humans had ever seen. It was dark, twisted, and it seemed to reach across space in ways that violated every law of physics. The energy touched the Nethark ship, and suddenly the aliens inside began to scream. But these weren't the screams of pain that the Nethark usually caused. These were screams of terror. The aliens who had spent millions of years perfecting torture were experiencing something that made their own methods seem gentle. The ship crashed into the mountainside. Amy walked to the wreckage and found 3 Nethark survivors. They were cowering in the ruins, begging for mercy in their alien language. Amy looked at them with her dark eyes and spoke in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere else. Now, you know what it feels like to be afraid? But this is just the beginning. What Amy did to those aliens created recordings that were immediately classified at the highest levels. The Nethark, beings who had tortured entire civilizations, were reduced to sobbing, broken things in less than an hour. They begged for death, but Amy wouldn't give it to them. Death is too easy, she said. I want to show you new forms of suffering. Forms that exist in places your kind has never imagined. When Helen saw the recordings, she realized what they had unleashed. The last protocol had worked. Amy had the power to fight the Nethark and win. But the price was becoming visible. Amy was no longer just a human soldier. She was something that enjoyed causing pain in ways that the Nethark couldn't understand. She spoke of the alien suffering like an artist discussing a masterpiece. We need to transform more people, Amy said when she returned to the facility. The Nethark fleet is huge, and I want to make sure each of them gets the attention they deserve. Helen looked at the other volunteers, who were watching Amy with a mixture of admiration and fear. They still wanted to undergo the transformation, but now they understood what they would become. Begin the next phase, Helen ordered. Transform all of them. As the other volunteers entered the transformation chambers, Helen wondered if they were saving humanity or destroying it. General Paul Mitchell sat in his office staring at reports that made his hands shake. The war against the Nethark was going better than anyone had hoped. The alien invasion had been stopped, then pushed back. And now the transformed humans were hunting the aliens across the solar system. But the victory reports read like horror stories. Paul had been a soldier for 30 years. He had seen combat in 4 different wars and thought he understood what violence looked like. But what his transformed soldiers were doing to the Nethark was something beyond war. It was art, and the canvas was paint itself. Colonel Amy Peterson knocked on his door. She looked the same as she had before the transformation, but her eyes held something that made Paul's skin crawl. When she smiled, which she did often now, it was the smile of someone who had discovered a new favorite hobby. "Sir, we've cleared the Nethark forces from the Mars colonies," Amy reported. "The survivors are being held for questioning." Paul knew what questioning meant now. The transformed humans had developed methods of extracting information that made the Netharch's own torture techniques look merciful. They could reach into an alien's mind and twist their thoughts until reality itself became a source of agony. "How many survivors?" Paul asked. 47, Amy replied. "We're taking our time with them. Each one is teaching us something new about pain. Did you know that the Nethark have 17 different types of nerve endings? We're learning to stimulate each one individually." Paul felt sick. "Amy, these are prisoners of war. There are rules about how to treat them." Amy's smile grew wider. "The rules were written by humans for humans, sir. The Nethark spent millions of years perfecting torture. They turned entire civilizations into screaming decorations. Are you really worried about their rights?" Paul couldn't argue with that logic, but something inside him rebelled against what Amy had become. "What about the other teams? How are they doing?" "Captain Mike Johnson's team cleared the asteroid belt yesterday. They found a Nethark breeding station with over 2,000 aliens. Mike says it's the most fun he's had since the transformation." Paul pulled up the report on his screen. Captain Johnson's team had taken 3 days to work through the breeding station. The recordings showed things that would give normal humans nightmares for years. The Nethark had been subjected to tortures that existed on levels that didn't have names. "Lieutenant Grace Williams reported in from Jupiter's moons this morning," Amy continued. "She's developed a new technique that lets her inflict pain across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Nethark she's working with can feel agony in realities that don't exist." Paul closed his eyes. Grace had been one of his best officers. Before the transformation, she had been kind, intelligent, and dedicated to protecting innocent people. Now she spoke of torture techniques like a scientist discussing research. "Amy, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." Paul said, "Are you still human?" Amy considered the question seriously. "I remember being human, sir. I remember caring about human things like mercy and compassion. But those feelings seem small now, like toys I played with as a child. I've grown beyond them." "And what have you grown into?" "Something that can save humanity from creatures like the Nethark. Something that understands that sometimes you have to become a monster to fight monsters." Paul looked at more reports on his screen. The transformed humans were winning the war, but they were also changing in ways that scared him. They had begun to organize themselves into groups they called pain circles. These were meetings where they shared new torture techniques and competed to see who could cause the most creative suffering. The recordings from these meetings were disturbing. The transformed humans spoke about their work with passion and excitement. They discussed the screams of their victims like musicians talking about symphony concerts. They had become connoisseurs of agony. Dr. Robert Chun appeared on Paul's communication screen. He was one of the few scientists still working on the transformation project, trying to understand what the humans were becoming. "General, I have some disturbing news," Robert said. "The transformation isn't finished. The changed humans are still evolving. They're becoming something that even the beings who created the last protocol didn't anticipate." "What do you mean?" Paul asked. "The Vorthic writings suggest that their transformed warriors eventually burned out. They used up their power and died, but our humans are getting stronger. They're learning to feed on the suffering they cause, and each feeding makes them more powerful." Paul felt a chill run down his spine. how much more powerful. Theoretically, there's no limit. They could become more dangerous than the Nethark ever were. The difference is that the Nethark were limited by their biology. Our transformed humans are connected to something fundamental about the universe itself. The final battle against the main Nethark fleet was set to begin in 3 days. Pol had 200 transformed humans ready to fight against an alien armada that numbered in the thousands. On paper, it looked like an impossible fight. But Pol had seen what his people could do. Captain Lisa Wong was chosen to lead the assault. She had been transformed only 2 weeks ago, but she had already shown abilities that surpassed the original. Volunteers. She could project pain across light years of space and twist alien minds into shapes that violated the laws of physics. The battle took place in the asteroid belt. Far from Earth, Pol watched from the command center as is transformed. Humans approached the Nethark fleet. The alien ships were massive, each one capable of destroying a planet, but Pol wasn't worried about his people losing. He was worried about what they would do when they won. The battle began when Lisa raised her hand toward the alien fleet. Energy flowed from her body, but calling it energy was wrong. It was something else, something that existed in the spaces between thoughts and dreams. It reached across space and touched the Nethark minds. The aliens began screaming immediately. But these weren't the screams of people being tortured. These were the screams of beings who had suddenly realized that they were not the most dangerous things in the universe. They were the screams of creatures who had spent millions of years as predators, suddenly discovering what it felt like to be prey. The other transformed humans joined in. They reached out with their minds and began to reshape the alien fleet. Ships that had been weapons of torture became prisons of agony. The Nethark inside found themselves experiencing pain that existed on levels their species had never imagined. The battle lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, the entire Nethark fleet had surrendered. Pol had never seen anything like it. The aliens who had conquered entire galaxies were begging for mercy from creatures. They had come to Earth to torture, but the victory came with a price that Pol hadn't expected. The transformed humans had tasted victory against the ultimate enemy, and they wanted more. They spoke of completing the great work and sharing the gift with the rest of humanity. "Sir," Amy said as she returned from the battle, "we've realized something important. The Nethark were just the beginning. There are other threats out there, other species that need to be dealt with. But more importantly, we've learned that untransformed humans are vulnerable. They can be hurt, manipulated, controlled." Pol didn't like where this was going. "What are you suggesting? We need to transform everyone. Every human on Earth should have the power we have. It's the only way to make sure humanity is truly safe. And if people don't want to be transformed?" Amy's smile returned, but now it looked different. It looked hungry. "Then we'll have to make the choice for them, for their own good, of course." Pol realized that the war was far from over. Humanity had defeated the Nethark, but now they faced a new threat. The transformed humans were no longer content to be protectors. They wanted to be rulers, and they had the power to make it happen. The Nethark had brought hell to Earth, but humanity had answered with something darker. Now that darkness was turning its attention to the people it had originally been created to protect. Pol looked at his reports one more time. The alien invasion was over, but the real war was just beginning. This time, humanity would be fighting for its soul against creatures that wore human faces and remembered being human, but had become something infinitely more dangerous: the victory. Celebration would have to wait. Pol had a new enemy to fight, and this time, the enemy knew all of humanity's weaknesses because they had once been human themselves. In the distance, he could hear the transformed humans laughing. It was not a human sound anymore. President Julia Martinez stood on the balcony of the White House, looking out at a city that no longer belonged to humanity. Washington had been transformed into something that hurt to look at. The buildings remained the same, but they had been changed in ways that made them feel wrong. The transformed humans had redesigned the city to better suit their new needs. The streets were empty of normal humans. Those who remained unchanged had learned to stay indoors during the day. The transformed humans preferred to move around at night, when the darkness matched their appetites better. Julia had been president for 6 years, but she had never faced a crisis like this. The Nathark invasion had been terrible, but at least the aliens had been an enemy she could understand. They wanted to conquer and torture humanity. The transformed humans were different. They had once been human, and they still claimed to love humanity. But their definition of love had become something monstrous. Colonel Amy Peterson entered the room. She no longer wore a military uniform. Instead, she wore clothes that seemed to be made of shadow itself. Her eyes had grown darker since the transformation. And when she smiled, Julia felt like she was looking into an abyss. "Madam President," Amy said, "we finished the preparations for the next phase of the transformation program. We can begin converting the remaining population tomorrow." Julia tried to keep her voice steady. "Amy, we've discussed this. The transformation has to be voluntary. People have the right to choose." Amy's smile grew wider. "With respect, Madam President, people don't always know what's best for them. The untransformed humans are vulnerable. They can be hurt, controlled, manipulated. We've seen what creatures like the Nethark can do to them. The only way to protect humanity is to transform everyone. And if they refuse, then we'll have to make the choice for them. It's for their own good." Julia looked out at the city again. In the distance, she could see the processing centers that the transformed humans had built. They looked like hospitals from the outside, but Julia knew what really happened inside them. Humans who entered came out changed, their minds reshaped, to accept the new reality that the transformed humans were creating. "The space colonies are refusing to allow any of the transformed humans to leave Earth," Julia said. "They're treating the entire planet like a quarantine zone." Amy's expression darkened. "The colonies are making a mistake. They think they can hide from the future we're creating. But we'll reach them eventually. Distance means nothing to us." Now, Julia shuddered. The transformed humans had developed abilities that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They could project their influence across vast distances, reaching into minds on other planets and twisting them into new shapes. The colonies were safe for now, but Julia knew it wouldn't last. Commander Frank Miller burst into the room. He was one of the few high-ranking military officers who had refused the transformation. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Madame President, we have a problem. The transformed humans have taken over the Pentagon. They're declaring themselves the new government of Earth." Amy laughed, and the sound made both Julia and Frank step back. "Frank, you're so dramatic." "We're not taking over anything. We're simply accepting the responsibility that comes with our power. The untransformed humans need guidance, and we're the only ones capable of providing it." "You're talking about enslaving the entire human race," Frank said. "We're talking about protecting them," Amy replied. "The untransformed humans are children playing with fire. They need adults to watch over them." Julia realized that negotiation was impossible. The transformed humans had moved beyond the point where they could be reasoned with. They saw themselves as a superior species, and they viewed normal humans as pets that needed to be managed. "Frank, activate the resistance protocols," Julia said quietly. Frank nodded and left the room. Julia knew that the resistance had been preparing for this moment. They had built hidden bases in the mountains and underground tunnels that connected safe houses across the country. It wouldn't be enough to stop the transformed humans, but it might buy time for the colonies to prepare. Amy watched Frank leave with an amused expression. "You think you can fight us, don't you? You think normal humans have a chance against what we've become?" "I think we have to try," Julia said. "Let me show you something," Amy said. She raised her hand, and suddenly Julia felt pain unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't physical pain. It was something deeper, something that reached into her soul and twisted it into new shapes. The pain lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. When it stopped, Julia was on the floor, gasping for breath. Amy looked down at her with something that might have been pity. "That was just a taste," Amy said. "A tiny fraction of what we can do." Now imagine that pain lasting for years, decades, centuries. That's what we can give to anyone who opposes us. Julia struggled to her feet. You're no different from the Nethark now. No, Amy said. We're much worse. The Nethark were limited by their biology. We're connected to something fundamental about the universe itself. We can cause suffering. That exists on levels that don't have names. The resistance began the next day. Frank led a group of unchanged humans in attacks on the processing centers. They used explosives, guns, and anything else they could find. But their weapons were useless against beings who could reach into their minds and turn their thoughts into torture devices. The first battle lasted less than an hour. The transformed humans didn't kill the resistance fighters. Instead, they changed them, twisting their minds until they became willing servants of their new masters. Frank watched his soldiers turn against him, their eyes growing dark as they joined the transformed humans. Dr. Karen Foster was one of the last scientists still working on a way to reverse the transformation. She had been hiding in an underground laboratory, trying to find some weakness in the process that had changed her colleagues. It's impossible, she told Julia during a secret meeting. The transformation isn't just physical or mental. It's spiritual. It changes something fundamental about what they are. They're not human anymore, even if they look like us. What about the colonies? Julia asked. Can they help? Karen shook her head. The colonies are too far away and they're too scared. They've quarantined the entire Earth system. No ships are allowed in or out. They're treating us like we're infected with a disease. Maybe we are, Julia said. The end came sooner than anyone expected. The transformed humans had grown tired of playing games with the resistance. They reached out with their minds and touched every unchanged human on Earth simultaneously. In that moment, every normal human felt the same pain that Julia had experienced in the White House, but this time, the pain didn't stop. It grew stronger, more complex, more artistic. The transformed humans had decided to demonstrate their power. By turning the entire planet into a canvas for their art, cities became galleries of suffering. Buildings were reshaped into instruments of torment. The sky itself was twisted into patterns that caused pain to anyone who looked at them. The transformed humans had turned Earth into a masterpiece of agony. The space colonies watched from a distance, as their home planet became something that violated every law of nature. They received one final transmission from Dr. Karen Foster, broadcasting from a bunker deep underground. This is our last message, Karen said. We tried to save ourselves by becoming something worse than our enemies. The Nethark consumed worlds, but we learned to consume souls. We became darkness itself rather than be consumed by it. The transmission showed footage of what the transformed humans had created. Pain that existed across multiple dimensions. Suffering that could be felt by creatures that hadn't been born yet. Torment that reached backward through time and forward into eternity. Don't let us spread, Karen continued. Don't let us follow you to the colonies. Remember us as we were, not as we became. We saved humanity from the Nethark, but we couldn't save humanity from itself. The transmission ended with images of the transformed humans' latest creation. They had learned to weaponize the very concept of suffering, turning it into something that could destroy entire realities. They had become gods of pain, and Earth was their temple. The colonies sealed their borders permanently. Earth was declared a dead world, a place where humanity had chosen to become something that even demons feared to name. The greatest enemy humanity had ever faced wasn't the Nethark, or any other alien race. It was the price of victory itself. In the darkness of space, the transformed humans looked toward the stars and smiled. They had saved humanity from the Nethark, but they had also discovered something wonderful. There were other worlds out there, other species that could be taught to appreciate the art of suffering. The Nethark had brought hell to Earth, but humanity had answered with something darker. Now that darkness was ready to spread across the galaxy, bringing its gift of eternal pain to every living thing it could find. The war was over. Humanity had won, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. 10 years had passed since the Nethark invasion ended. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The transformed humans had not stopped with Earth. They had spread across the stars, carrying their gift of pain to every corner of known space. Captain Alex Turner stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Hope, watching the stars through the viewport. Behind him, 200 families slept in cryogenic pods, refugees from Earth who had managed to escape before the transformed humans took complete control. They were heading to a distant galaxy, hoping to find a place where the darkness hadn't reached. "Captain," said Navigator Jenny Martinez, "we're receiving a transmission from the Kepler colony. They're requesting immediate assistance?" Alex felt his stomach tighten. The Kepler colony was 3 galaxies away from Earth. If the transformed humans had reached there, nowhere was safe. "Put it through," Alex ordered. The face that appeared on the screen was pale and frightened. Colony Administrator Tom Bradley looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Captain Turner, thank God you're out there. They've found us." "The changed ones have found us." Alex closed his eyes. "How many?" "Just 1 so far. But that's all it takes. She calls herself Grace Williams, says she used to be a lieutenant in the old Earth military. She's been here for 3 days, and she's already changed everything." Alex remembered Grace. She had been one of the first volunteers for the transformation program. Before the change, she had been kind and protective of innocent people. After the change, she had become something that enjoyed causing pain in ways that defied understanding. "What has she done?" Alex asked. Tom's voice shook as he answered. "She's set up what she calls a teaching center in the main colony building. She's taken 50 of our people inside. We can hear them screaming, but when we try to rescue them, she does something to our minds that makes us forget why we came." Alex had heard similar reports from other colonies. The transformed humans didn't just torture people anymore. They had learned to manipulate reality itself, changing memories and thoughts to suit their needs. They could make people forget their own names or remember things that had never happened. "Has she made any demands?" Alex asked. "She says she's here to help us evolve. She wants to transform our entire population. She says the old way of being human is finished, and it's time for us to become something greater." Alex knew what that meant. The transformed humans believed they were doing good work. They genuinely thought that turning everyone into creatures like themselves was a gift. They couldn't understand why anyone would want to remain unchanged. "We'll be there in 18 hours, Alex said. "Try to keep your people away from her until then." "Captain, what can you do against something like her? She's not human anymore. She can reach into our minds and twist our thoughts. She can make us feel pain that exists in dimensions we can't even imagine." Alex looked at the weapon locker beside his command chair. Inside was humanity's last hope, a device that had been developed by the few normal humans who remained on Earth. It was called the Severance device, and it could theoretically cut the connection between the transformed humans and the source of their power. "I have something that might work," Alex said. "But I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out exactly where she is and what she's doing." "Can you do that?" Tom nodded. "I'll try." "But Captain, if this doesn't work, what happens to us?" Alex didn't answer. He couldn't tell Tom that if the device failed, the entire colony would become another teaching center, another place where the transformed humans could practice their art of suffering. The New Hope reached the Kepler colony 18 hours later. From orbit, the colony looked normal. The buildings were intact, the power grid was functioning, and life signs showed that most of the population was still alive. But Alex knew that appearances could be deceiving when dealing with the transformed humans. He took a team of 5 volunteers down to the planet's surface. They all carried severance devices, though none of them knew if the weapons would actually work. The devices had been tested on volunteers, but never on a real transformed human. The colony's main street was empty except for a few people who walked in strange patterns, their eyes unfocused and their movements jerky. When Alex approached one of them, the man looked at him with confusion. "Are you here for the lessons?" the man asked. "Grace says everyone needs to learn. She's teaching us about pain, about how it can be beautiful when you understand it properly." Alex felt sick. The Transformed humans had learned to reprogram people's minds, making them willing participants in their own torture. "Where is Grace now?" The man pointed to the colony's community center. "She's in there with the advanced students. They're learning the deeper mysteries today." Alex and his team approached the building carefully. Through the windows they could see Grace standing in the center of a large room. Around her, 50 colonists sat in chairs, their eyes closed and their bodies trembling. They were experiencing something that was happening inside their minds, something that made them shake with terror while smiling with joy. Grace looked exactly as she had 10 years ago, but there was something different about the way she moved. She flowed like water, like someone who had learned to exist in more than 3 dimensions. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome, students, to today's lesson," Grace said. "Today we will explore the relationship between memory and agony. I'm going to show you how pain can be so beautiful that you'll want to experience it forever." The colonists in the chairs began to scream, but they were smiling while they screamed. Grace had done something to their minds that made them enjoy their own suffering. They were being tortured and loving every second of it. Alex raised his severance device and aimed it at Grace. The weapon hummed with energy, designed to disrupt the connection between the transformed humans and the dimensional source of their power. He pulled the trigger. The beam struck Grace in the chest, and for a moment she stumbled. The colonists stopped screaming and opened their eyes, looking confused and terrified. Alex felt a moment of hope. Then Grace laughed. The sound was like breaking glass mixed with thunder. "Oh, that tickles," she said. "Did you really think you could sever my connection to the hunger space? I am the hunger space now. I've become one with the source of all pain." Grace raised her hand and Alex felt something grab his mind. It was like having his thoughts pulled out through his eyes. He could feel Grace rummaging through his memories, looking for the things that had hurt him most in his life. "Alex Turner," Grace said, reading his mind like a book, "you lost your wife in the Nethark invasion. You blame yourself for not being there to protect her. How interesting. Let me show you what really happened to her." Images flooded Alex's mind. He saw his wife being taken by the Nethark, saw her being tortured in ways that defied description. But then the images changed. Now he saw that it was his fault. He had chosen to run instead of fighting. He had abandoned her to save himself. Alex knew the memories were false, but they felt real. Grace was rewriting his past, making him remember things that had never happened. The guilt and pain were overwhelming. "Stop," Alex gasped. "But we're just getting started," Grace said. "I want to show you what pain can become when it's properly cultivated. I want to teach you to love your suffering, the way I've taught these colonists to love theirs." Alex felt his sanity slipping away. Grace was reaching deeper into his mind, finding fears and guilts that he had forgotten. She was turning his own thoughts against him, making his memories into weapons of torture. But then he heard something that gave him strength. It was the sound of his crewmates firing their severance devices all at once. The combined beams struck Grace from multiple angles, and this time she screamed. "Impossible," Grace said, her voice filled with confusion and pain. "The connection can't be severed." "I am the connection," but the weapons were working. Grace's form began to flicker, becoming less solid. The colonists in the chairs shook their heads, their minds finally free from her influence. "Run!" Alex shouted to his team. "Get everyone to the ships, now." As they evacuated the colony, Alex watched Grace through the window. She was fighting against the effect of the weapons, trying to maintain her connection to the hunger space, but she was losing. Her form was becoming more transparent with each passing moment. "This isn't over," Grace called out, her voice echoing across dimensions. "You can't stop all of us. We are everywhere now. We are the future of humanity." The New Hope left the Kepler colony with 300 survivors. As they jumped to hyperspace, Alex wondered how many other colonies were dealing with transformed humans. How many people were being taught to love their own suffering. The war against the Nethark had ended, but the war for humanity's soul was just beginning. The transformed humans had spread across the galaxy, carrying their gift of pain to every world they could find. They believed they were helping, believed they were making humanity stronger, but Alex knew better. The transformed humans had become something worse than the Nethark had ever been. They were humanity's children, and they were determined to remake. Their parents in their own image died in the depths of space. The New Hope continued its journey to unknown stars, carrying the last free humans toward a future that none of them could predict.